Ladies and gentlemen, with our current ignorance and short-term vision, the future generations will shoulder much of the long-term economic and social consequences. Youth empowerment is a shared responsibility. We are humbled and honored to have a powerful panel lineup of speakers who will examine the identities the seniors play as exemplary role models in this digital age, and the importance of continuous development of digital competencies while involving digital savvy youths in building societal resilience in today's complex, interdependent world. These are the issues we'll be addressing today in our Empowering Future Ready Youth Power Panel. And our first guest panelist is Jeff Sandhu, who is currently the head of FutureX talent of Sunway iLabs. And Jeff believes that there is a strong need to innovate the way that we learn with the rise of technology. Our second guest is Qyira Yusri, who is the co-founder and education director of Undi 18, a Malaysian grassroots movement that successfully lobbied the Malaysian government to reduce the minimum voting age from 21 to 18 years old. Our third guest is Vice President at MDEC, who is in charge of digital talent development. Dr. Sumitra Nair's mandate is to work with like-minded ecosystem partners to build a sustainable and quality talent pool for digital technology sectors. To date, her work has impacted more than 1 million Malaysians. We have a special guest who is joining this power panel. He is Shahril Azuar Jimin. He is Shahril Azuar Jimin, the CEO of Maybank Foundation. In his role, Shahril has the opportunity to work with various communities in areas off the beaten tracks across Southeast Asia. And moderating the panel is Ganeshwaran Kana, a business journalist of Star Media Group. This is a very youthful, and it already sounds like it's going to be an exciting panel. The panel are getting ready, so please do stay tuned. We will be back in just a short while.
And thank you for being with us today at the grand finale of Star Media Group's Digital and Data Virtual Conference. I am Ganeshwaran Kana, and I will be moderating this youthful panel today on a topic that I think which is very pertinent and interesting, which is on the youths of Malaysia and their future readiness in being digitally competent and also being competitive across the world of youth similar age. So together with me today, we have 4 interesting speakers with diverse backgrounds. So I'll just give you a short introduction of them. On my right is Mr. Shahril from Maybank Foundation. He is the CEO. And next to him is Dr. Sumitra Nair from MDEC and digital talent. And next is Mr. Jeff Sandhu. He is from Sunway iLabs. He is the head of FutureX talent. And last but not the least, we have the youthful Qyira Yusri from Undi 18. She is the co-founder, and she is also currently the education director of Undi 18. So before we kickstart the discussion, I think I would give a brief thoughts of myself on the topic today, which is the youths of Malaysia and their future, facing the future. I mean, over the last 10 years, we have seen technological development and accessibility faster space than what we have seen over the last 5 decades. And children and youth Facebook, Instagram, all other platforms. And we are also seeing the youths starting up their own businesses as early as 10 years old. And I have bought handicrafts from a youth, from a teenager, 14 or 15, from Instagram. So that is the kind of development that we are seeing in Malaysia as we are speaking. But at the same time, what we are seeing is that based on an answer provided by the ministry in Parliament, over 30% of school-going children today do not have adequate gadgets to do their study at home and during this new norms times. And at the same time, you also hear criticisms from many people saying that Malaysian youths, when compared to other youths in the region, especially those in India and China, Japan, South Korea, we lag behind in terms of our digital competency. So there are 2 sides of the coin, and we hope that our lineup of panelists today will be able to share their insights and what do they think about how we can change this readiness of youths so that a baby born today will be future ready over the next 15 or 18 years. So just to kickstart the discussion, maybe we can go from Mr. Shahril. Where do you think Malaysian youths stand today in terms of their digital competency? Do you think they are ready to embrace the future? Do you think that they can go into the gig economy? Are they ready? And do they lag behind when compared to youths in other regional countries?
Thank you, Ganesh. Thank you to the Star Media Group for inviting me, and thank you for taking away 10 years of my age. Be part of this panel. It is very interesting times that we live in today, and your question is very pertinent. Having said that, a lot has happened over the last few months, just this year alone, which has made center stage the issue of the digital divide, the access, the digital haves and the have-nots, right? But if your question is from a regional perspective, given the work that we do, given the work that Maybank Foundation does throughout the ASEAN countries, given the fact that Maybank is present in all the 10 ASEAN countries, I would say that the situation is not too bad. Yeah, if you're asking from a regional perspective, I've seen the youth in other countries in Southeast Asia, in Laos, in Myanmar, in Cambodia. So in terms of positioning, in terms of the digital awareness, in terms of digital literacy, I would say that we're not too bad. Of course, we lag behind some of the other countries. And knowing that you should not take presence on social media as a pure proxy, you should be looking at other things as well. But it's not too bad. And we know, for example, because we have developed technology areas related to banking. For example, one is our May application, Maybank Anytime, Every Time. And we've seen huge numbers of users. More than 1.7 million already signed up, and these are principally young people who adopt a lifestyle approach to finances rather than the more traditional people on even Maybank to you just 10 years ago. Yeah.
Right. Can we then have the opinion from Dr. Sumitra?
Sure. Thank you, Ganesh, for the question. I think it's a very relevant question to ask. At the same time, I don't think it may not be the most important question, right? Because throughout history, there have been many industrial revolutions. Of course, this one is faster, perhaps. In speed of change, it's faster. But humankind has had exposure to life-changing type of technologies in the past. If you think about it, fire was a life-changing form of technology, right? Back then, the weaving machine, steam engine, you can go on. Digital is the same, and it's probably not going to be the last. It's there's probably going to be other life-changing technologies, things that you're going to have to face. And so therefore, I don't think while digital competency is extremely important, it's not the most important. I think what is most important is having the right mindset, growth mindset, to keep learning and to keep growing, right? And to keep adapting. That is what has sustained humankind through the ages, the ability to adapt and to thrive. And to do that, you need resilience, right? And I think that's what we need to focus on. If you ask me about digital competency specifically, like Shahril, I don't think we're too bad off. At least from the work that we've done. We've touched through the work we've done, at least in the space impacting school children, we've touched more than 1.6 million school children around the country. And they come from all over the place, from as far up as Perlis, down to even some of the Felda communities down south. In Sabah, we've gone into rural areas like Tenom, Kudat, even Sarawak, Cebu and places like that. We see there are children who are able to adapt and who are able to embrace these technologies. It's And I don't think it's not about whether we teach them coding. Yes, coding is important, and that's competency. But more important is, do they have these qualities of being curious? Are they empathetic? Do they have the right value system to solve problems, to identify problems, and make use of whatever they have around them, right? Whether it is digital or whether it is, wood or natural resources, whatever they have, they need to use that to solve problems. That's what we need. There, I think we can do better, with regards to nurturing children who are more resilient, youths who are more resilient, and who are more empathetic, and who have a problem-solving mindset and a growth mindset. There, I feel that perhaps we may not be where ideally we should be. How do we compare with other countries? It's hard to say. Of course, if you take countries where it's a little bit hard, survival is a little bit harder. India, less developed countries, perhaps youths there naturally have had to become more resilient. We in Malaysia, we are quite blessed. Yeah, we generally, many youth have a safety net, right? Not all, but many of them have a safety net in the form of their parents, who are still able to support them, whether or not they have the right kind of skills. And so there, I think we can do better. Yeah, but I wouldn't sort of put us down as far as digital competency are concerned. We've got many of them, and I think Star has also covered many of them, the ninjas and digital ninjas. Many of them have won competitions globally, so they're already there. Even the world skills competition, the drone competition, the drones category, a Malaysian student from Negeri Sembilan he won the gold medal, right? So I wouldn't put us down in digital competency, but the other areas which are more important, I think that's where we should focus.
Right. Thanks, Dr. Sumitra. Let's move on to Mr. Jeff. Dr. Sumitra just now pointed out it's important to have that growth mindset, the curiosity. It's more important to create curiosity among school-going children and youths. So maybe you can also touch on that.
Yeah, so thanks Ganesh and also the staff for hosting. It's a week long. It's a very important topic as well. So I think as Malaysians, we love to compare. So we like to look at the neighbors down south. We like to look at some of the emerging countries. And the problem with comparison is that we like to look at some of the best output from those countries and compare it with some of the worst that we are seeing in the media itself, right? So that's the issue when we have with comparison. But I echo what Shahril and Dr. Sumitra has been saying. I think we do have great talents. Just recently, I think we had a young Malaysian boy who won a NASA competition, right? So that's a success story right there itself. And he's young, if I'm not mistaken, he's 9 years old or something like that. So I think what we have seen throughout the years, and I know Qyira, my next panelist here, will mention this, is that we're very hungry. The digital divide is true. It's there. We have areas that are mostly connected with 4G, probably 5G in the next coming years. And then there are areas where it's struggling to get Wi-Fi. People will have to go up to certain mountains and trees to actually sort of like get connection and stuff, right? So there is a gap. There is that divide. But that happens throughout every other country as well. We are not just unique that we have this problem. Every other country has this problem. But what we are seeing, especially, I run 42KL, which is a school. And what we have seen is actually people are hungry for these things, right? And this is not something new because we've seen with this technology shift, right? So with the dawn of YouTube and LinkedIn learnings and all this kind of Coursera, MDEC has provided various different types of courses. The take-up has been really good. YouTube, people are going on YouTube, learning about things that they're passionate about and then making a change, right? So you mentioned about, I think Shahril was mentioning going on Instagram, or I think Ganesh, you were mentioning going on Instagram, buying off things from individuals who you then realize are actually, 15, 16 years old, actually running an Instagram store. How did they do this? It's because they were just passionate about certain things and they were provided with that opportunity through these various different platforms, right? So what we need to do is how do we feed this hunger that individuals have. It's going back to that curiosity, right? We do see that Malaysians have that passion of doing things to make a change, but we need to enable that to happen, and that is by providing them with better connection and better sort of devices, platforms, making it accessible to more people. But that's not to say that by just doing that, we can then sit back and let people sort of jump into it. It's a lot of work to be done still, but the first step, and we're on the way there, right? So I do feel that I think we probably shouldn't really compare much. If the question is, are we hungry enough? I would just say, yeah, we're definitely hungry to actually succeed in this revolution. And COVID-19 has actually brought on to this urge, right? You've seen a lot of companies, large companies, actually now making that shift, and it's actually driven by the youth, right? The younger workforce who are actually going up to their senior management to actually say that this is how you can actually implement certain things in a digital platform, right? And that's an encouraging sign that they are now having their voices heard in the senior management of businesses and stuff, right? So I feel like we are definitely hungry, and I'm excited to see in the next coming years to see where Malaysia can actually the young talents that we have, and with the great work that MDEC and everyone else is doing, to see actually there are more great success stories, because there are already a lot. Let's not try to forget those success stories.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. One interesting point I noted from Jeff's sharing just now was the disparity on access to technology, and that how that affects youth empowerment and digital competency in Malaysia. We will get to that on our next question, but let's go to, I would love to hear from Qyira on your take on this. I believe you have worked with, you being a youth yourself, and you have worked with a lot of youths, especially those kids from schools. How do you see this? What is your take on this?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me again here today. I think when it comes to comparisons, which is what have people been doing or not been doing, I think you need to compare instead of just Malaysia to other regions, but can we look within our own country, right? Can we look at kids living in KL and kids living in a PPR in KL, and then kids living in a rural area in Sabah or Sarawak? The disparity is very clear. It has been raised in media, it has been raised by the kids themselves on social media, it has also been raised by politicians in parliament, whether they are taking it seriously or not. Both of those points have been raised as well. I think recently the CEO of Teach for Malaysia, Sun Seng, in a recent interview, he mentioned that when a kid, and we're talking about children below 18 years old here, when they miss out on at least 2 or 3 months of formal education, studies show that it will translate to being at least 2-3 years behind compared to our peers, right? So for example, my sister right now, who is in university, thank goodness, so she can sort of pivot to the online digital learning because she has the privilege to own a laptop, she has the privilege to be near strong internet, and to also be able to work a part-time job doing that. But for so many Malaysians and so many young Malaysians, this is not the reality. At the moment, even before COVID-19, only 15% of Malaysians are able to achieve tertiary education, and this include going for vocational courses and TVET schools and all that. So how will this divide increase a lot more now that it's COVID, it's digital, and then not to mention the Ministry of Education is also now, they are changing the dates of exams, changing the dates of when the kids are able coming back to school, and then we don't even know when kids are able to learn formally again, right? A huge part of education is that face-to-face interaction that you simply is very difficult to duplicate in a digital platform. And on the other hand, are our teachers also equipped to deliver classes online, right? So I think that's also another part where I think we often forget when it comes to looking at closing the digital divide. Sometimes it's not just enough to give kids data plans or giving kids laptops or extra phones, but it's also whether teachers are equipped to pivot their lesson plans to online, right? So one thing that also TFM did as a resource, I think within 1 month of MCO, they created tfmdistancelearning.org, which provided a few forms of lesson plans. One is for teachers and students with low bandwidth. One is for teachers with medium bandwidth and high bandwidth. So with high bandwidth, schools can invest in using Canvas, using Moodles, things that I did in university. And then I see like kids as young as 10 years old logging on to Canvas and YouTube education. But then you also have kids with low bandwidth. So how do you deal with that, right? Teachers would pivot to delivering lessons on WhatsApp, right? Okay, open your book, read this, respond to me on WhatsApp. text to me in English, make sure that you use correct grammar before texting back your teacher, before texting in a WhatsApp group. So there are many ways to integrate the usage, integrating digital lessons in our daily lives, and these are one of the ways to do it. But I think the question of when you want to compare access and all that, which I know you'll touch into later, but another example is that when Undi 18 organized Parliament Digital in July, right? And that was, I would say, in a way, right, it is so brand new because our parliament refused to even consider it at that moment. But then again, if you look at regionally, countries like Sri Lanka, Maldives, already pivoted to either full virtual parliamentary sitting or even a hybrid parliamentary sitting, like the UK did. So it was quite, interesting, or it was very bizarre for us as young people to like, why isn't our institutions, right, regardless of whether it's a government or corporations or universities, why the hesitance to take that leap to embrace fully or to innovate in how we disseminate information, into how we engage and interact with the average Malaysians out there. So there are many ways to make digital content accessible, right? For Parliament Digital, we had a sign language interpreter, right? We had sign language interpreter. Whenever we can, we provide subtitles. These are all just tiny ways to make our content accessible and engaging, and it projects, sincerity and authenticity in engaging the wider Malaysian audiences, because you're showing them that you are trying the best you can to communicate as much information as we possibly can in this pandemic, which is the kind of reassurance that regular people are looking for from corporations, institutions, and governments.
Right. To audience who are watching today, two of our panelists, Mr. Shahril and Dr. Sumitra, have said that Malaysian youths are actually doing good in terms of digital competency, while there are still room for improvement. While two of our other panelists, Mr. Jimin and Qyira, have said that have mentioned about digital disparity and how this impedes the further progress in empowering youths in Malaysia. So let's delve further into this digital disparity. Over the last many recent years, we have seen more focus in terms of youth empowerment and increasing their digital competency by both the government side as also the non-profit private sides. So, but do you think that this focus has been primarily on the urban areas, especially the well-to-do urban areas, and touching the less, like what Qyira said just now, those in those rural, urban poor? So do you think that this focus on youth empowerment has been extensive? And do you think that this will further worsen income inequality over the next few years because of this digital divide in Malaysia? Maybe we can start with Dr. Sumitra.
Thanks, Ganesh. You're right. There is a risk, right? There is a risk for those who do not have access to these devices. But when you talk about, what initiatives have been done, whether it's by non-profit or private sector or government, I have a slightly different view. I don't think it's been limited to urban, because we do work extensively with a network of partners across the country who are trying their best, who understand that some of these areas don't have access, and they're trying their best through creative means to bring this access. So let me give you an example. We all know e-commerce. With COVID, e-commerce has experienced a huge sort of an uplift, right? But unfortunately, if you live in a rural area and you are engaged in cottage industries, you may not have the same access or the same knowledge. And so what we've done is we have worked with, there are these Pusat Internet Desas, this community internet centers, which are located by post offices in the same vicinity of a post office, each of them. And so we've actually gone in and provided this one-stop e-commerce service where the center managers have been trained to become almost like your online marketing agents, and there's a little photo booth there for you to take a picture of your local product. They will help you to put it onto a Shopee or a Lazada or some other online platform, and then help you to market it, right? And there's the logistics right by there. And so these are nationwide, right? So that's one example. So many other examples, right? We also have about 90 what we call digital maker hubs. And so these are maker spaces that are, again, established by either private sector or government agencies, state agencies, universities, or not-for-profits. If we had just gone and said, okay, we're only going to do the urban centers because that's the lowest cost, right? Then you just work with the private sector where there's a clear commercial viability. But because of this collaboration that there is there with all the different sectors, and you mentioned non-profit, and that's extremely important, we've been able to get it up to 90, right, across the country, including in places like Tawau, and many other areas like Kota Baru and so on and so forth. So I think you always need this collaboration to drive it, and there are efforts, and the good thing is there is realization, right? Yes, there are pockets of communities where they are behind, but I also like to think that, when there's a will, there's a way. And we all have seen Viviana, many other examples, right? When you really want to do something, there is a way, you will find a way to do it. But we cannot take our eye off that ball. We have to continue to drive and make sure that inequality it reduces, and that this equitable scaling, of initiatives continue on, from all parties, and collaboration is key in this respect.
Right. Thanks, Dr. Sumitra. Maybe Jeff, you can also comment on this.
Yeah, I think collaboration is really a key here. The sad thing is when we look at some of the situations that happen outside of the urban areas, is that we assume with an investment that it's being made, and within a week or a month or a quarter that we will then reap the benefits, right? Sadly, that's not the case. Education is a very long process. It takes years of continuous investments, of continuous education, in order for us to actually reap the benefits, right? So this is something that we will have to continuously talk about it. I'm sure next year, if we do another event, we will still bring this same topic up, because the progress to actually achieving what we envision or what we dream is a long process, and it's never ending. There's never a goal post or a finish line where you can cross it and you say, we've done it. That it doesn't work that way, right? So what I would also like to point out is the way we teach and the way we are taught has to change. The problem with all this talk about digital education and going online is not the simple fact of just getting Wi-Fi, internet, 3G, 4G, laptops, iPads, tablets to the hands of the students and teachers, and then just saying that we've done it. It's not as simple as that. Because if it was, then it would have been solved a long time ago, right? Because MDEC and various other non-profit groups and private institutions and foundations have done that, right? What needs to change is the way that we teach in a digital environment has to change. And kudos to Teach for Malaysia, who's actually looking at low bandwidth, medium bandwidth, high bandwidth. That's a great first step to it, right? So what we look at in iLabs and in 42KL, in my perspective, is that we take it a step further with what we do is we remove teachers. So that itself, for us, we feel it's a very revolutionary way of teaching. Because teaching is always teachers, the first syllable of the word, teaching is that teach, right? So we've actually removed that element completely now. How you learn is you learn together with your peers. Now, if you put that environment of peer-to-peer learning in areas like Tawau, for example, you will be surprised to see some of the outputs that come from that environment, because they are trying to solve problems for them to survive and for them to then strive, right? So it's very hard for us to go to certain of these kind of areas and implement things that we believe in the urban areas, like this is what you need to be done and this is how you can solve it, right? Because we don't understand the situation and the climate over there, right? So what we need to do is enable this kind of environment where you can share knowledge. There is a knowledge sharing economy that happens in that area. It's facilitated and empowered by digital because they have these tools, but they need to be able to have that that knowledge sharing economy, right? Where they can then come up with great innovations that solves their own problems and sort of come up with solutions within their area, which we can then say like this is a great way, and now we can then scale this up to different areas because their problems are probably problems that happens in different areas as well, right? So that's how we need to look at, right? I think education itself needs to change. We can't just say like let's put all the curriculum and the syllables that we've done in the last 50 years and put it online and then give Wi-Fi and tablets and that's it, right? That can't work.
Right. Very interesting point. Qyira, do you share your thoughts on this?
I mean, I agree with all of what Jeff said, right? How do you look at community-focused solutions when it comes to education and bridging the digital divide? Because, like he's right, teachers, they can't be at every single kids' homes all the time. If they can't be in school, then they lose connection with the kids. And then you also have talking about kids who don't even consider formal education as an option because they don't find it interesting, right? Which is often the case for low-income communities, right? Because they see that earning an income for my family is a lot more important than going to school and read a book. So I think institutions, and there's research that has been done, globally, regionally, into looking at how do you produce community-focused solutions? How do you empower the figures in a child's life when it comes to education? How do you work with the parents? How can you work with siblings? How can you work with ketua kampongs or resource areas within the kampong, within small towns or kampong, like what Dr. Sumitra mentioned with post office? Can you look at any of the existing Dewan Besar that's existing? How do you change those infrastructure to accommodate the pandemic today, right? Beyond just what it is now, right? How do we creatively innovate those spaces for kids to also learn?
What's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, exactly what Dr. Sumitra said. I don't think there has been any clear intended strategy to be divisive in terms of national implementation, not in this country and not any country that I see. Yeah, because at the end of the day, countries will want to create as much inclusion as possible, right? And what Jeff was saying as well, you don't just go out and teach, here's a module on digital competency. It should be infused in many other things as well that leads towards that. Because it will be a fatal flaw to think that let's go out and teach digital competency and that's it. Therefore, we have created inclusion. No. There's a lot of things like what Dr. Sumitra was saying, the values. We need to infuse a lot of that as well. So here's where I'd like to give some examples of what we have done, try to infuse that in some of our programs. We started out in more traditional brick and mortar. We have a program called Casual Kids, which is about teaching financial literacy to school children. We started out very much brick and mortar in schools in Malaysia. Today it's running in 6 countries throughout ASEAN. We've trained more than 211,000 school kids across 6 countries, working with various stakeholders. And this is where Jeff also mentioned the need to work with multi-level stakeholders, have various kinds of engagement, because it needs to be a concerted effort. So we have digitized much of our financial literacy program. We have created online applications, apps, marketplace, and so on for them for these 9 to 12-year-olds to pretend that they're adults, that they are able, they actually get points, and that they're able to make purchases and so on. So in teaching financial literacy, we also infuse and enhance digital competency. So that's an example of a program that we have. Another program that we have, which we're very proud about, is called Empowering Youth Across ASEAN. It's a partnership with ASEAN itself through the ASEAN Foundation. We find the top 100 youth across Southeast Asia, across the 10 ASEAN countries, and we get thousands of applications. We choose the best 100, 10 from each ASEAN country. Start off with a capacity building workshop at the ASEAN Study Center of Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok, and we partner them with CSOs and NGOs. We send them for community investment programs that we fund. Yep. And we find that many of them are non-urban kids, right? And that's where we can already state from the onset that digital competency has very little to do with where you are, and certainly an intelligence level as well. You cannot make an assumption that just because somebody is from a rural area that he will not perform as well, given the opportunities. So we've seen that, and we've put a lot of applications for that as well. But certainly all the right things have been said. It needs to be a big concerted effort. Everybody's got to come together. Government certainly, yeah. and various institutions and private sector and to make it happen.
Right.
I just want to add on to Shahril, right? Like you mentioned, great point in terms of how you're building this, right? If we were to summarize this, I know we spent a bit too long on this question, but if we were to summarize, digital is not a tool, it's actually a culture. So I think we need to think of how we actually, when we say digital, it's not a tool, it's a culture itself, right? And when it becomes a culture, then we will really see the benefits and reap the benefits from this.
The danger is for people to think it's end all be all.
That's my concern too. It shouldn't be, right?
Right.
It's an enabler. It's the way we do things. It's culture. That's what culture is. It's how we do things, right?
So the bottom line is we shouldn't be too rigid how we see this change towards digital competency.
I mean, that's important, definitely. If you think about it, if you take an analogy, if you have two guys just as intelligent, right, and you give them a problem, let's say you give them wood, and you say go build a house, right? So obviously the guy who's got carpentry knowledge will be able to build that house better and faster compared to the guy who doesn't. He's going to struggle with it. Same thing with digital, right? So if you have digital knowledge, obviously you can get along faster and better, and you can be more competitive in what you do. But digital alone is not going to do it, right? So you still need to have that problem solution focus, that problem solving, that curiosity, that empathy. All that still needs to be there, right? And that's most important, because if you have that, the other things you can learn along the way. And the great thing about digital is it is quite democratized in the sense that you can learn it at any point. It doesn't mean that if you miss it in school, you can't learn it as an adult. You can. My 80-year-old dad is extremely active on social media, right? And he learnt it. He never had formal lessons, but self-learn, right? And there are kids like that too that are from the rural areas who have self-taught. We've had kids who put stuff on Apple stores, and there's this one kid generated more than 600,000 ringgit in revenue, right? Just from apps that he put on iOS store, right? And who taught him? Self-taught.
Right.
So as long as you have the mindset, the growth mindset, and the willingness and the know-how on how to self-learn, you can pick it up.
I know that we have spent quite some time on the second question, but it was very, we see different opinions and very, very insightful views on this. A key point that I took from this is that digital is a culture, and we have to find a way to make it more inclusive. We have to infuse it in the education system, and for that we need to rethink how do we provide the education system to our kids. How do we do the teaching moving forward, especially post-COVID-19. So let's take a moment and let's now imagine ourselves being a decision maker at the Ministry of Education. So today we are now someone in the Ministry of Education, and let's say today we are going to make a policy for how can we make a 7-year-old kid today digitally competent and future ready when he or she is 16 or 15 years old later than over the next 9 or 10 years. So what kind of revamp do we have to introduce in the local education system? Any one of you want to start with? Maybe Qyira?
That's
whatever thing that comes into your mind now.
I think for me, when it comes to education, and something I'm very passionate about, right? So actually before Undi, I worked in Teach for Malaysia, which is why I'm very familiar with their programs. I always believe that the most important core competency, digital ke tak digital, you have to infuse and cultivate in children is critical thinking. Without critical thinking, without the ability to question, the ability to have self-awareness, it's very difficult for kids to embrace any form of new knowledge without it becoming information regurgitated from the teachers. So I always believe that, in our, I've had the privilege of experiencing both private and public education. And you can see one of the clearest differences that I've experienced is that I'm always challenged in terms of my mindset and my beliefs when I'm not in public school in Malaysia, right? Whether this comes to autonomy or capacity or ability, that's a different question altogether. But as a student, I really appreciated having my biases, my beliefs being challenged within a classroom setting, because it is a safe setting where you're able to voice up your opinions. I think that and then transitioning out into university where all my, almost all my education tools were, either a laptop or a phone. You communicate through emails with the professors, all that. It really teaches you, that transition makes it a lot more, it becomes a lot more easier when you have that ability to have critical thinking, because it affects how you interact with others. It affects how you become a user online, and it also affects how you, interact with society overall. So for me, it's something that I've been advocating for years, is to infuse more critical thinking within our education system. And how do you translate, how do you show the kids that, what they learn in classroom can translate into real life, and why it's so important to carry those skills up into real life when they leave school, no matter what age they leave school.
Right. So Shahril, just now you spoke about having the need to create inclusion in the education system. So back to my earlier question just now, what kind of revamp do you think is necessary?
Actually, that's such a huge question. I don't realize, I don't know whether you realize how big that question is. There's a group of highly intelligent people called PADU in the Ministry of Education, plus a lot of other people as well trying to do that. And I have a lot of respect for what TFM does. I have volunteered for TFM. I taught one day at a school in Banting, and I know what great stuff they do. And I know what great things institutions that come out with, trust schools are coming out with. It's a huge thing, but perhaps, and I'm not going to be able to tell you, but perhaps some of the things that needs to be thought, as part of a larger revolution, because it needs to be a big mindset change revolution. Start thinking about recognizing things like micro-credentials, rather than let's wait 6 years, take an exam, or let's 3 years, take an exam. Start recognizing things like micro-credentials. Allow various stages of intervention during the school that infuses things, that forces them to go more digital, for example, that forces the government to introduce more infrastructure for digital. Yeah, but micro-credentials, I mean, we in Maybank, we're quite familiar with that already. We have in our iLabs that we introduced for our staff to do Python. I mean, these are non-technical people that do Python, do R at basic and intermediate level. Yeah, I had no idea what Python was just a couple of years ago. Yeah, but it's not a snake. Yeah, but it's something that you give the opportunity, and this is the way that you create more inclusion. But maybe perhaps start looking at micro credentials.
Right. A very interesting point. Maybe Dr. Sumitra, you want to add anything on this?
Yeah. No, I think both Qyira and Shahril made some very great points. What I would perhaps, if I were in that seat, and I'm sure the government is already thinking about this, is how do we get our children to be self-learners? Yeah, and how do we get them engaged in the learning process? Right. In if you think about a commercial company, when they put their products out, they look at customer engagement indices. When you are in an organization, you have employee engagement indices. I don't know if we have student engagement indices, right? And I actually think, based on what I've observed, is there are many children who may be disengaged, and I think this is an area of work that TFM has probably done a lot of areas. So maybe we also need to think about a student engagement index, right? How engaged are our children in that learning process? That's probably one thing we can do. And then the second one is, to as I said, to cultivate this ability to self-learn, right? And to do that, to be self-learners, they need to be curious. They need to question. And they need to be given the freedom to question, and not to overemphasize conformity, which is what we tend to do, follow the rules, follow this way of thinking. And so that's when you can't challenge by, your other views and so on. So how do we break that? This overemphasis on conformity and this overprotection of, how to think, what to think. It can't be about that. We need to free them up. We need to empower them with the right values, and then let them unleash that curiosity, develop the critical thinking, and they will immediately have to learn and pick up skills in order to solve those problems. Yeah. So those are my views.
So interesting sharing this now. You mentioned that we have to create an enabling environment so that the kids can pick up values, and then they can, like Qyira said, also we have to make them being able to be critically. They need to have a critical mindset so that they can think of their own. But the question is our current education system accommodative enough to allow that
You asked what we would do to change, and this is what we would do to change, right? So, assuming you can start afresh, assuming there is a blank canvas, this is what needs to be done.
Right.
And I think it's not as if all teachers are not doing the right thing. There are many that are. And
Right.
we've seen so many, not just in TFM, but so many others, even in rural areas. We need to make them the champions. We need to make them the ones that inspire that change from around their community. You know, get more teachers into it and show them what's possible. Like we've got kids from Kubang Krian, right, who come out and speak like as if, you know, they are speaking on a world stage, you know, had fantastic communication skills. They've thought through the problem, you know, they're able to communicate. Government school, right? And there are many others like this, but not enough, perhaps not enough, right? So how do we then get them to inspire change with the others? If we continue to say that, you know, is it possible, can we do it, we're not there yet, nothing will happen,
Yes.
right? We will have to look forward and we will have to move forward. Pick our battles, you know, and highlight those success stories, as what Jeff said, highlight more of them, then we can start to inspire change, community by community.
Right. Jeff, you want to add to this?
The beauty of going last in this is I had time to flash back to about 20 years ago when I was in my final year of my Sekolah Menengah journey, right? But I echo to, you know, all of my esteemed panelists have mentioned here. But if I were to look back on my own personal journey, right? So I was never one of those students that fit in the education model. You know, you have to memorize everything, you get an A or 100, and then you pass, and then you can go for scholarships, grants, and, you know, go up to the higher education and study abroad and all that kind of stuff, right? I was never that kind of student. I struggled in you know, sekolah rendah, sekolah menengah. I really did. I struggled because I just couldn't fit in whatever that, you know, this is the only way to succeed, is that you have to get A's in this subject, this subject, this subject, and if you fail this, it's going to reflect badly on you. I feel what needs to, if you know, there are many things that needs to be changed. But one of the areas that we could also look at is how do we actually encourage those who actually just don't fit in this model, like how we celebrating like failure, like we punish failure. You know, if you fail something, you then, you know, in classes, right? So I was in like kind of like the middle of my high school, like I was in like class H, you know, so it's like kind of like in the middle. For those who do well, they get in class A, class B, class C, right? And then those who don't do well the following year, you then get demotivated down to the lower class. So mentally, and you know, it affects you, right? You feel like I'm just not good enough as some of my other peers that I see, right? So I feel like that impacted me quite a fair bit, which I then had to find my own way of actually, you know, surviving and trying to survive and strive in different areas, right? And actually make it on my own, right? Even families then, you know, they were like, maybe he needs help, you know, maybe we need to send him for extra tuition classes and stuff like that, right? But there was nothing wrong. It's just that I didn't fit in the model, you know? I feel that's one of the areas where, you know, it could be looked at. Because not everyone succeeds in one certain area, right? There's no book that can tell you, like, if you do this from A to Z, guaranteed success. There's no such thing. So I think we need to see how education can adapt to the various different types of individuals who have different skills. You know, we already have like, you know, TVET, you know, which really does help in this move to Industrial Revolution 4.0. You know, what about STEM education, right? Are we doing enough in that area, right? So there are many different areas. Of course, I'm in no position to tell, you know, the people who are in power to actually, these are the things that you should do. And I'm sure they are already thinking about many different areas of how they can, it's a long journey. If we could answer this in a 10 minutes session, then, you know, wow, you know, it would be great, right? But I'm sure they're talking about this. But these are the things that maybe we ourselves should also look at. Parents, you know, teachers, you know, when you do teach some of these kids who continuously fail, maybe, you know, there is a way to actually approach them differently instead of punishing them if they fail, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that there are many the school kids and youths out there who just doesn't fit in the in whatever marking mechanism that we have now, just like in your case. And I think rather than playing a blame game, you know, blaming the teachers or the government or the private sector, it's better for everyone together and then come up with a macro and micro kind of approach to deal with this. So, we have a few more minutes left, so maybe we can go a quick round of sharing, starting with Mr. Shahril. How do you think the civil society has performed the last few years in enabling this youth empowerment in digital competency? And moving forward, what is your aspirations?
I think by and large, civil society has done fairly well. Yeah. In fact, I mean, they've done better in many aspects of the non-civil society in that respect. And in many cases, they're not even reacting. They are innovating, particularly through areas, as I say, it's not primarily to address digital competency, but through their social enterprises, through some of the business startups that they do, and they find those solutions to some of the other problems. And in the process, they also address some of the issues that needs to be addressed. So I think in terms of civil society, not too bad. What we do in Maybank Foundation, we also help capacity building some of these CSOs that we work with, and we share our knowledge with what we have in terms of our expertise. Quite a bit more to be done, but I would think on the overall, for civil societies in Malaysia at least, not too bad.
Right.
Yeah, we do, at MDEC, we do a lot of work with not-for-profits and with social enterprises, and they definitely have a big role to play. I'm not in a position to comment if they're receiving enough support. I'm not sure, yeah. But I think maybe we need to encourage not-for-profits or even NGOs or charitable organizations to also adopt new thinking, yeah. So, if in the past, right, when you think about charitable organizations, they depend on charities, they depend on donations, right? More and more, I think that's becoming more and more challenging, where you have a model where you're entirely dependent on donations. Right. And so they also need to pivot towards looking at more social innovation, social enterprises, have a different model that makes them more sustainable, right? But I think as far as Malaysian ones are concerned, yes, we do have a fair bit of them who are innovative, who are collaborative, and we need to encourage more participation from more parts of the civil society.
Right. Thanks, Dr. Sumitra. Jeff?
Yeah. So I think they're doing a great job. What's encouraging is actually a lot of these non-for-profit organizations are actually led and started by youth, yes, right? Like, Undi 18, Teach for Malaysia, right? So that is a very encouraging sign that you see the youth are now a lot more aware of what they actually have, the power that they have to make that change. They're a lot more invested in sustainability than my generation per se, and even some maybe the older generation as well. They're a lot more, like you see, like Greta Thunberg and stuff, right? So these are individuals who are really rallying up the youth, and we should enable them to actually come up with their own non-for-profit organization or their community, and to actually empower that, right? I think it's really encouraging to see the world is really embracing that change. The youth are really making that stand up, and I have to say kudos to Undi 18 to actually stepping up and making that change, because I think what Qyira and her team has done is fascinating, and so great stuff.
Right. Thanks, Jeff. Qyira?
Yeah, I think I'll just try my best to keep this short as well. I think a lot of non-profits and advocacy campaign like ours come from a place of scarcity, right? And we always operate on a limited resources. I also can't say whether all NGOs are adequately supported as well, because it's so challenging to even map out the complete ecosystem that we exist in. But I think it's actually maybe an unpopular opinion among my peers in my field, is that I believe that non-profits and especially advocacy campaign like ours, right? Like we push for youth empowerment and youth enfranchisement, all that, is that how do you also have that business development mindset where you don't just rely on charity or donors to give you? Because then personally for me, I'm not the biggest fan of that model of if an organization adopt that model entirely as its business model, because then you are entirely reliant on what they say or what they would ask you to do, and then it leaves you with very little creative space and innovation space actually. And I think for Undi 18, it's like an annual target. How do we make something cool every year? How do we make history every year in that sense? I feel like if we rely on the traditional way of how NGOs operate, we might be limited in that sense, right? So I think at Undi 18, we try our best to encourage and also set the culture for youth organizations that are playing in the field as we do. Is that how do you challenge yourself to become innovative in how we source funding, in how we create events, how we do program design, how do we also measure it and our impact as well? I think these are all key things that many young people don't consider when they start off their own movement or start off their own organization, and then they realize later that when they want to scale and they want to expand, that this is the challenges, because these are all what sophisticated funders will ask for. How do you prove your impact? How do you justify the ROI and all that? And I think for us, we learned the hard way. And I think so. One of my aspirations is that more youth NGOs would consider these aspects that might be the boring side of organizing an organization, but it is part and parcel of running a successful organization.
Right. Thank you, Qyira. And to those who are watching, we have come to the end of our session today, power panel session today. And thank you to all our speakers, Mr. Shahril, Dr. Sumitra, Jeff, and Qyira. Thank you for your insights. And as we have heard from them, youth empowerment and making them digitally competent is not is a never-ending journey. So, and it's a very flexible and fluid. We need a flexible and fluid kind of approach in making sure that empowering the youths can be done across the board, reaching even those at the rural areas. And we do not have the time to blame game. Instead, everyone has to work together in order to make this a success for the youths of Malaysia. So thank you for your time, dear speakers. And I think I have played my role in provoking you to give answers. And thank you to the viewers. Thank you.